A new study warns climate change could sentence Melbourne and Sydney to 50-degree days by the turn of the century. The study, led by the Australian National University, warns that even if the world keeps its Paris Climate Change Pact commitments to limit warming to well below 2 degrees, Australia could be on track for unprecedented extreme heat. Joining us now for more on this live is our Sky News meteorologist, Tristan Myers. Tristan, can we really expect 50-degree days to become the norm in places like Melbourne and Sydney? I think this study estimated that that could happen as soon as in the next 2 decades, in the next 20 years.
Yeah, more like 20 to 30 years, and I don't think it'll become necessarily the new norm. What it will be is one of those really extreme heat events that we have during summer. It's going to be much more intense. What the researchers did is they calculated the range of temperatures that parts of Australia could get under that 2-degree warming scenario with that Paris Climate Accord. They then calculated exactly what times we could expect that, and it looks like between 2040 to 2050 we could expect that heat. And one of those heat scenarios does include a 50-degree day in Sydney or in Melbourne. But my interpretation of this, and the researchers explicitly say not to take these numbers as prescriptive, so my interpretation is that these extreme heat events are going to become much more intense and much more frequent in the future, and that's something that we've already seen.
And Tristan, how would these cities cope with that? I mean, how would Sydney and Melbourne, for example, cope with these higher temperatures? They're not exactly built for those sort of conditions.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we haven't seen a 50-degree day in Sydney or Melbourne, so it's very hard to tell. But infrastructure starts getting bogged down by the heat. For instance, Sydney train, they can't operate over 39 degrees without slowing down that maximum train speed. Energy security is going to be a big issue if you have these extreme heat events occurring fairly regularly over the next few decades. And moreover, heat waves are known as the biggest weather killer in Australia, more so than bushfires and tropical cyclones. They really affect people like the elderly and those with heart disabilities quite intensely. So unfortunately, there's just a range of things that can happen to these cities when you get extreme temperatures such as this.
Yeah, and the thought of a 50-degree day, Tristan, it probably wouldn't be as shocking to residents in some parts of the country. What is actually the highest temperature we get in Australia now, and what sort of temperatures could some of those already very hot places potentially reach if this study is correct?
Yeah. Well, the highest temperature on record was set in 1960. It's Oodnadatta in northern parts of South Australia. It got to nearly 51 degrees there. We've had 50-degree days, not every year, but we get them once every few years. Look, places like that, it's difficult to say exactly how hot it would be. The researchers didn't exactly study rural parts of South Australia. But look, the heat that Sydney and Melbourne and all the capitals experience, it comes from places like that. The heat develops across the interior and then gets filtered to the south and the southeast by winds. And so if it's hot in Melbourne and Sydney, it's got to be hot in those places too, but it's difficult to say exactly how hot it would get.
So just more broadly, just looking across the country, are we actually already seeing temperatures creeping higher, and those heat waves that you mentioned, are they actually already starting to last for longer in Australia? Is the evidence clear on that?
Yeah, it is. It's very clear, unfortunately. We are, the last 4 years have all been within the top 5 hottest years on record. It's 2013, the hottest year on record nationally. And, you don't have to take it just based on instrumental observations. You can look at other things, like the vegetation, for instance. The bushfire season, much longer because it's so much hotter and it's so much drier. And resources, we share resources with the United States when it comes to bushfires. And because there's now an overlap of the bushfire season, we're seeing those resources being strained. So there's a number of indicators, not just temperature measurements, which are indicating that heat waves are becoming more intense and they're becoming more extreme, not only in Australia, but globally.